All right, so today I'm gonna say some things, and for the most part, it's gonna go over a number of you. It's just gonna go over your head. And I've held this information for years, and I've wrestled with my people trying to get us to understand the importance of it. But year after year, it's just rejected. I get rejected. The information gets rejected. No one's interested. So today, I'm just putting it out there for the other people because the other people seem to have a better concentration with respect to the value of information, and then they'll take it and put it into action. And then my people, for some strange reason, will watch them, and whatever they do, then we seem to want to pattern, ourselves after it. We're a reactionary people, unfortunately. As much as I speak to the point of how we need to be proactive, that just doesn't seem to be, on the scale of importance, for my people. So for the rest of you out there who understand how to use information and put it into place, all right, I'm gonna drop some jewels, for you. I'm gonna talk to you. I'm gonna explain to you what a state is, um, and how you can successfully compete with a state, right? These are things that are written. That's what I love. I can't deal with things if it's not written. So this, what I'm going to share with you, it's written, right? Like in all of the sources and resources, all of the things that are considered the standard, for education and understanding and knowing, it's written, right? This is what they thrive, off of. So let me just start out by explaining certain nuances of the 14th Amendment. Then I'm going to take you into like what a state is. Well, with the 14th Amendment, I'm going to explain like the limitations of it and who it applies to and how, it applies. Then I'm going to take you into what a state, is. And this is going to be something that for the most of you, you've never heard it, before. But this is what's written. And don't expect, for them to just openly, share these things with you. I've been researching this stuff for over, 20 years. And this is a part, of my research and the body of work that I have going. Right. Then, I'm going to introduce you to a solution to where you can actually compete with a state on the same level as a state because there's no monopoly with respect to the process. All right, so without further ado, y'all, let's jump into it. We're going to look at the 14th Amendment, Section 1. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Keyword jurisdiction. So pay attention, as we move forward, because jurisdiction is going to be like a key part of this subject matter. All right, subject to the jurisdiction thereof uh, are citizens of the United States. All right, so it says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. So if you're subject to the jurisdiction, you're a citizen of the United States. So keep that in place, right? It says, and of states wherein they reside. So with this, you'd have to understand what a state is to even realize if you're subject to it based on the jurisdiction. Then it says, all right, now separate that. Then it says, no state, and again, we're going to learn a new understanding for what a state, is, right? It says, no state shall make or enforce any laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States. Then there's a semicolon, right there. But let's remember, privileges, these are things that are afforded to you by the state that you belong to. They're not rights. And that's what a lot of people get confused when, well, let me say my people. a lot of my people get confused when they run around talking about we have voting rights, not understanding it's a privilege that they call a right. It's a play. It's like they're playing on jargon, at that point. But voting rights are actually a privilege because it's something that the controllers of the state and or the jurisdiction can take away and or they can grant. All right. So it said abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizen of the United States. Okay. It says, nor shall any state, and again, focus on that word, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So without due process of law, y'all, that's like, where you see the feds want to sue, the state, or the state want to sue the feds, you know, this is one jurisdiction going against another jurisdiction, which you're going to learn a jurisdiction is a short term for a state, right? I'm going to give you that definition to back up, what I'm saying. So now that we know, states are simply jurisdictions. When you get into the scale of the jurisdiction, it's like these jurisdictions can't really do anything without due process of law. That's why they're constantly suing each other. But then it says no state shall make or enforce any laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunities, of the citizen of the United States. And then it says, nor shall any state. Now, this is when you move out of the point from the federal, concept, right? Because now, nor shall any state, and this is not looking at it from the federal sense, nor shall any state deprive, and remember, state is just a jurisdiction. Nor shall any state deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without taking them to court, without due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the law. So if you're a part of a state, that means you're a part of a jurisdiction. If you're a part of a jurisdiction or if you're tied to a jurisdiction, you're classified also as a state. Now, let's look at the terminology for a state. A state is sovereign in its territory. This is the definition, right? A state is sovereign in its territory, comma, which is also known as a jurisdiction. Right? So a jurisdiction and a state, these are the same thing. So if you have a jurisdiction, you're sovereign within the territory. Now, we're going to learn how these territories overlap, each other. And how if people learn to function from the standpoint of a jurisdiction, it will give you the ability to compete with the state. Right? So you won't have to wrestle, with them like you see so many people wrestling as you got, these folks today, as my friend, so eloquently and humorously he said, man, these white folks then effed around and found out, talking about the shenanigans, everything that's going on with the state of the government today, and the way they're breaking things down, and people are being stripped of certain things. Well, if these people understood that really all they had to do is reposition themselves, reorganize themselves, because right now it's just a whole lot of unorganized mass groups out here. But if they reorganize themselves to become these jurisdictions, then they would have the same power that these so-called states have. They would be considered sovereign within their territories. Now we're going to talk about, how these territories legitimately can overlap, because that's what they do. That's how you have the state, the federal. These are all different jurisdictions, but they're considered sovereign and they share the same demographic, right? All right, so a state is a sovereign in its territory, which is also known as jurisdiction. Now, when it comes to the rights, that an individual have, it's understood that these jurisdictions can't create laws to interfere with the rights of the individual. So we have several Supreme Court cases that validate this. This is why I love what's written. So you have Miranda Supra, which says where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. Now, let's understand rights. This is not something that the state can grant and or deny. This is something that comes from the Creator, right? So the next one, looking at court cases from Hurtado versus California and Bodie versus Connecticut, it says the principle that the state cannot diminish the rights of the people is supported by several Supreme Court cases. So it's understood that when it comes to your rights, the state can't interfere. The issue has been individuals haven't been able to understand their interaction with the jurisdiction, that they can even qualify whether they're in cahoots with what's going on, or if they want to separate themselves from it. But when it comes to your right, like the right to function within an established jurisdiction, the state has no power to tell you whether you can or you can't do this thing. You just need to have the fortitude, right, and the volition to want to organize yourself in that manner to create a jurisdiction that will then compete, with the state. Man, I wish my people could catch what I'm saying and we could come together and function within this capacity and take that 2 trillion in purchasing power that we have, convert it into value, create our own currency, and then function, as a state. Man, that would be a game changer. But yeah, my people don't want to hear it, right? They just want to keep chasing, after whatever the oppressor has put out here, for them, and they don't want to hear this. So for the other people, let me finish explaining as we come now to the solution. So the solution is something called conterminous jurisdiction. It's also called cotier jurisdiction, right? But the conterminous jurisdiction, this is what it means, right? Jurisdiction such as state, right, that share a common boundary or are enclosed within the same boundary or limits. That's what I'm telling you. With a jurisdiction, the demographics can be the same with respect to how they overlap, right? Now, in legal terms, conterminous jurisdiction refers to two or more jurisdictions that share the same boundaries or have the same scope of authority, meaning they cover the same geographical area or legal matters. This is what I'm talking about, y'all. When it comes down to having power, being able to compete with the state, like you have folks out here arguing, within these town hall meetings and all of that, man, y'all wasting your breath, right? They just want you to feel like you are heard. But if people really want to do something, then step back, understand what it means to compete with the state by organizing yourself as a jurisdiction. Then you now have power, as it said, based on the definition. As a jurisdiction, you have the power of a state being sovereign in the territory. And because it's conterminous, these jurisdictions sharing the same boundary, having the same scope of authority, looking at the same geographical area, y'all, that changes the game, right? But they will never tell you that these are options on the table or these things are written. But everything I've said, you can research it and you can find, that it's sourced, within the Supreme Court, that it's, sourced, within the libraries, and you can find these things, right? These things are available. So anyway, that's the game changer, right there. If you want to compete, if you truly want to have power, you have to reposition yourself as a jurisdiction, which would, make you equivalent to a state. Then, if they want to do something, they have to do it, based on due process of law. And it's now, a bunch of paper pushing where everybody's taking everybody, to court, type of thing. So that's what I wanted to share with you. And as I said, for most of you, it just goes over your head. But for some of you, a light bulb, just came on. And for my people, man, I just wish, we could get our stuff together and, come to organize for something or under something that's real, right? And I know this is different, but there's truth to what can be done. Y'all out here asking for reparations, and you want, the white folks to give you this and to do. They ain't gonna give or do nothing. But we can take this concept of creating jurisdiction and having the power of the state to where we can compete, with a federal government, a state government. We can compete because then we become, a government within our right as being a jurisdiction. If y'all ready for it, it's a responsibility. But look, who else is better, to handle our affairs than us? You just have to know that you have the strength and or power to do it. And as long as you're positioning yourself to, ask, them, for an opportunity to do this or that, they're not going to give it to you because they need you to continue doing what you're doing within their jurisdiction. All right. So hopefully, this information was impactful, exciting. Hopefully it's useful. And if you want to learn more, if you want to understand more, I mean, hey, reach out to me. I'm here. All right. Y'all be easy.